Hey all, welcome back. So we've gone through creating date variables. We've gone through creating a variable for season. We've used our date variable to allow us to look at month, date by month or quarter. We've also made a parameter that'll allow us to cycle through different fields in our visualization so that we don't have to remake our visualizations for each individual field that we want to look at. The next thing I want to do is talk about mapping. In the data set that we have, we've got a variable for state. And this is fine, I suppose. Like, we could look at recreation visits to each state. We could even put a color in there for overnight stays, or let's maybe do proportion staying overnight. So for a larger dot, we've got more stays, and we need to change that to average proportion staying overnight. And then colors, light or dark, depending on the proportion of people that stay overnight. Oh, look at that, 1.58. Well, there's a problem, but we're not going to address it right now. Where do proportion staying overnight? Where do 154% of people stay overnight? Well, for now, let's just exclude that from our view. So we can see that in Texas, there's a park where 39% of people stay overnight. But California has so many parks. You know, we've got Joshua Tree, we've got Redwoods, we've got Sequoia, Kings Canyon, we've got Yosemite, we've got Channel Islands, right? I really want to see a dot for each park, but it's not in this data set. Well, the thing with Tableau is that we can link one data set to another as long as they have at least one field in common. So under our data source, it wants me to reconfirm what data source I'm looking at. We've got park name. We also have, and I hid it, but let's unhide it now, unit code. Let's unhide that one and then hide the rest of the fields. This unit code is going to be consistent across all national park published data. So if we can find a data set that has geographic information for the national parks that uses this unit code, we can just link them up. And there's some good news for that, really. And the good news is that the National Park Service publishes information on location, both on the centroids, which is the coordinates of the central point within each park, and then also on the boundary, which will give us an actual shape of the park in space. And these things are published on National Park Service's Land Resource Development website. And you can Google this if you don't have access to that link. But we're going to download two files. We want the centroids and the boundaries. So I'm going to click on the boundary centroids. And there's a dot for every park, but this is also historic sites, a bunch of other things that aren't just national parks. And I'm going to click download. It's going to give me a variety of choices to download, but I'm going to download the shapefile. When it downloads and gives me an option, it's a big file, or I have bad internet. Pending, come on. Download complete. So I'm going to put in my data file, this is the centroids. So I'm going to call it NPS centroid. And it's going to save over something that I already have saved, but that's fine. Already exists. You want to replace it? You won't have that option, but that's just me. So now I've got the centroids. Then we'll go back. Does it have to just stay there forever? And we'll scroll down and we will get the boundaries. we'll do the same thing. We'll download the shapefile. But when this one comes download, we'll call it NPS boundaries. You won't have to replace, but I will. And now I've got boundaries and centroids. Okay, wherever you put those on your computer, I want you to navigate to them. And let's start by opening the centroids, and then let's start by opening the boundaries, and then I'm going to delete the 2 zip files. Great. Now park that somewhere where you can find it, and go back to your data source, and let's start by adding the centroids. So we're going to add, and we need to go to a spatial file. And now in my national park data set, wherever my data is hiding, we'll pop into centroids, and I'm just going to double click the whole centroid file. And then I'm going to select NPS boundary centroids shape, and it'll be the only one that it lets me choose. Once it pops up here in files, I'm going to click on it and drag it into the field, and that little blue line is going to pop up, and that's called the noodle. And a relationship between 2 tables exists when they have a field in common. I know in the NPS recreation data, I have a field that's called unit code. And in NPS boundary centroids, let's type in unit and see what we have. We have unit code 1. So now these are linked where the unit code from our recreation data is set to be equal to the unit code from the NPS boundary centroids. So if you pop over into a new sheet, sheet 5, let's say, we now have all of these other fields that come from our new sheet, NPS boundary centroids. Do we need these all? No. In fact, what I really want is only this variable that's called geometry, and that will represent the center point for the parks. So I'm going to right click, I want to rename it. Why? Because geometry isn't that helpful. Park center, that's the location of the park. And then all of these I can get rid of. Well, not get rid of, but let's hide them. So a good way to hide a lot of things quickly, under the Data tab, there's our park center. Hide. Hide. Great. So now all I have is my park center. While we're working on it, let's do the same thing in data source. Let's add our boundaries. So we'll add a spatial file. We'll navigate to the boundaries, and we'll bring in the boundary shape file. So now there's the centroids and there's the boundary. We can leave the centroids here, but we'll drag the boundary in. Oops, we'll click on boundary, sorry, and then we'll drag the boundary file in, and we'll look for that noodle. And we're going to go through the same process where it's the unit code from the recreation data table, right? What table do we want from the NPS recreation data? It's going to be equal to what field in the boundary shape file? It's going to be unit code. And now we've got this relationship. If we pop back into sheet 5, now we can see that the boundary centroids, right, those are our centroids, and then the boundary is our boundary, and we again have all of these variables. in this case, our geometry, right? We've got the location of the park center. And now let's call this one, we'll rename this one, we'll rename geometry into park boundary. And then we'll hide in our data source everything except for the park boundary. We'll pop back into sheet 5. We'll take a deep breath. We'll hit save. And we'll know that we've kept everything that we have until now. So this step here, adding these shape files, relies on Tableau allowing us to set up a relationship between two separate tables as long as they have one field in common. We'll pop back in a minute to show some of the things we can do with these boundaries and centroids.